Right, ladies and gentlemen, now here we go with our next session. The India Story. How do we avoid the middle income trap? This session is sponsored by Tata Capital. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed group of panelists, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman Niti Aayog, Dr. Rathin Roy, Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, NIPFP, Mr. Raamdeo Agrawal, Joint Managing Director, Motilal Oswal Financial Services Limited, and the session will be moderated by Mr. Nilaya, Varma, Partner and Leader, Markets Enablement, KPMG.
Thank you.
Sir, but before we start, I would request Mr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog, and Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, Chairman, Hero Enterprise, to release a report jointly produced by Pehle India Foundation and Mindmine Summit titled India's Course to 2030. Can we have a round of applause? Before we start the session, ek bari zordar taaliyan. Let's welcome this session with enthusiasm and zest. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I could request you to settle down. We have a great session today. We have a very, very eminent panel members. Let me just set the let me just set the context. We want to, and that's the aspiration, India is to be a 5 trillion economy by 2025. That requires growth, not just growth, significant growth. And yet you've got experts talking about structural crisis, which basically means that we may not even have higher single-digit growths. And that's the dilemma, and that's what people are calling as the middle income trap. We also have data, if you just look at about 101 countries which were in middle income in 1960, only 13 could graduate to higher income by 2010, almost 50 years later. Even if you look at 2010 data, 30 of the 38 countries which were in the lower middle income definition continue to be there after 28 years. So clearly there is something important about discussing this, and we've got a great panel. So let me start with you, Dr. Roy. You kind of mainstreamed this discussion on the middle income trap. And I think the point that you've made is that India's growth has been driven by consumption, but that consumption is about 100 million odd people. And with that slowing down, we really have a problem of middle income trap. You said this about 3-4 months back. You've seen the data thereafter. You've also seen the reforms that have been initiated. What's your view on where we are heading now?
Thank you. Well, actually, I've been saying this in slightly less spectacular fashion for the past 3 years. But then nobody listens. You said 4 months. That's a good proof of where we are in this country in policy discourse. I said it on NDTV 4 months ago. Yeah. And then everybody woke up. Everybody. So, in fact, I was with Mr. Munjal, I think 2 years ago, on a panel where I said the same thing and we agreed. So the problem is not, firstly, something that has arisen in the last 5 years. It is a consequence of the way India has grown since 1991. And I'll explain this to you very simply. In 1988, for a while, I was a lecturer in the Shriram College of Commerce. My salary then was 3,000 rupees a month, mercifully only for 6 months. Then I moved into investment banking. So that's about 36,000 rupees a year. Those days, a Maruti car cost 1.5 lakhs, yeah? An air conditioner cost about 25,000, and a Bombay-Delhi air ticket cost 3,000 rupees. So translated to my salary, a car was like 3 years and 8 months salary, an AC was like 9 months salary, and a Bombay Delhi air ticket was 1 month salary. Cut to now, over time, and the same guy, Shriram College of Commerce, entry level government, 65,000 rupees a month, last I saw. It keeps going up with DA. Okay? That's 8 months to buy a Maruti car, 10 days salary to buy an air conditioner, and a Bombay Delhi air ticket now is less than 1 day's salary for an entry level person earning that amount. But if you look at stuff that all Indians consume, and I'm not talking about poor Indians, especially people earning the minimum wage or below, then they have not benefited from this change, which is why the leading indicators of Bombay for the past 20 years have been not cycles, two-wheelers, four-wheelers, air conditioners, FMCG, because that's where the domestic demand has been. What I was afraid of, and I'm quite surprised it's come so quickly, it may not be, there may be a correlation, it's certainly a warning, is that this music will stop one day, and it does stop. But in India, we have to be particularly conscious of two things, and I'll stop there. One, 100 to 150 million is a bloody big market. So you're not going to see market signals telling you these things are petering out. It's a huge market. As long as the going is good, you'll be happy. Second thing is, India has never been an export-led economy. I'm not talking about future continuous 5 trillion kal hoga, hum export power banenge. Ye main zindagi bhar sunte aa gaya hu, main 52 saal ka hu. I'm talking about what we have actually done. And in terms of actual doing, we've had phases when our exports have risen, but it's always been a complement to growth. Growth has come from domestic demand. We are not the biggest manufacturer of yellow rubber ducks, China is. Add to that the fact that large sections of things that 100 million produce are actually now being produced by Bangladesh and Vietnam. And you will see why I'm worried. So the solution is very simple. Move to producing at affordable prices, stuff that people earning the minimum wage, or twice the minimum wage, or 3 times the minimum wage can buy. You will easily attain a $5 trillion economy. But you're not going to do it with the leading indicators of Bombay being your guide stone.
Interesting, you spoke about the NDTV interview. In that interview, you also spoke about gave the example of Marks and Spencer shirt of yours, which is about 3,000 rupees, which is typically produced in India, and yet the 400 rupee shirt, which most Indians buy, is produced in Bangladesh, and that's where the challenge is. Is this something that you want to just explain what we really need to do, because that sounds very logical?
Well, you need to, obviously, if you're going to make if you're competitive making 3,000 rupee shirts and you're refusing to make 300 rupee shirts, you've got to look at why. There's a problem with yarn, I won't go into that, but the fundamental also issue is that wage costs in South Gujarat and in Tirupur are much higher than wage costs in Bangladesh or Vietnam. But wage costs in Bihar, UP, Jharkhand, MP are not that high. So you could set up units there. Now I have to ask the private sector, what is the Lakshman Rekha that prevents them from doing what the Tatas did and actually going and setting up units in Bihar, Bengal, and be honest about it. You know, if you don't like those places, say so and tell us what we can do about it. But it's facile to say that we have a wage constraint in areas where there's so many people migrating for a fraction of wages, and there's no skills constraint in textiles, just like gems and jewelry. 15 to 20% of the workforce sitting in Tirupur and sitting in South Gujarat are from Bengal, UP, Bihar. Why can't those people become entrepreneurs? How do we effect that change? That's a key to answering how we complete our development transformation and avoid this middle income trap.
Absolutely. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, if I can come to you. I'm not so sure you agree with whatever has been said so far, given your projections of the way the growth is likely to happen, higher growth. But one thing that even the Prime Minister spoke in the speech on 15th August is about wage disparity, or what he called wealth inequality, or wealth, the wealth creator, and then have to be wealth distribution. There are estimates which suggest that 1% of Indian hold about 73% of wealth in India. Is that something that we really need to address as a policy, as a framework, to be able to address the issues that have been raised?
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. What I'm not sure at all whether the issue that you just raised merits any policy attention at all, because I'm not sure that we are going to go after people whom the Prime Minister called the wealth creators and the wealth producers, because I think their role is supreme, their role is principal. They are the main drivers of growth, and I think the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister made it clear and so have we done in Niti Aayog, that if India will grow, if India will breach the middle income trap or reach the middle income status, it will have to be done on the basis of private enterprise. Now, this is why I also don't tend to agree with what Rathin has just said, because the assumption being made by what Rathin is saying, that if the private enterprise is the driver of growth, then that must necessarily mean inequality in the country. And if you are unequal in the country, and I've spent 10 years in Manila, where I've seen the inequality at various levels, then you cannot get the demand, or you cannot get the sustenance that a much broader based economy will have to offer. Because the point is that this is where I think the private enterprise, a robust, dynamic private enterprise, has to work together with a development state which makes its public services, which performs its mandate in the most efficient, transparent manner and without generating rents in the system. Now, this is exactly what this government has done for the last 5 years. I think what Rathin should do now is to go back and look at the fact as to what is the impact of opening 365 million bank accounts in this country. What is the impact of saying that you will have a modernized agriculture in this country? An agriculture sector which employs 43% of your labor and produces about 15 or 16% of GDP is not the basis. That's what you have to modernize, and there is a huge scope for modernizing that. And there is in agro-processing, the growth rate, the capital growth, investment is growing at 1% while it should go at 3% plus more. The last 5 years of this government have been spent precisely in making sure that the benefits of growth reach to the bottom of the pyramid, and that everybody gets included in that. Because if you don't, yes, of course, you will get inequalities, and you will get, you'll get a constraint where you go. This is therefore now the time, and this is what I've been saying, quite loudly, which is that having done that in the past 5 years, if you now focus on growth, focus on giving the investment up again, focus on getting the right, getting the financial markets right, getting the credit supply right, you will get growth, which will not follow Rishi Sharma's, example of saying that 5% is the new normal, because we can't afford that, which will get you to 7, 8, or 9% per annum, and that will help you, reach the targets of the 5 trillion economy or the rest. Now, all of this, not to say, whether this middle income trap business is at all relevant, because middle income stretches from about $2,500 or $3,000 to $12,000. Now, there's a huge, range there, and I'm not even sure that going forward we really do want to breach that and become a $15,000 economy, the way we live and the way we survive, because the whole model, therefore, has to be rethought here. So my understanding, Nilaya, is that we are now in a situation, and there are now some hiccups at this moment, where if we get the short term right, we can get the growth going again, get the engine started again, and working, and we will get the growth that we need for raising this country towards a income level which will be widely distributed, which will have less inequality, and therefore get the country to where it desires to be.
Absolutely, and I will come back to the short-term thing, because that's something that people want to talk about. But I think both what you and Dr. Roy said is about the private sector. Everybody agrees that the private sector has to drive the growth. And that's where I'll come to you, Mr. Raamdeo. We've been discussing just a while back. You said that, look, many of the things that we need to do are rather simple. You spoke about the fact that government and private sector need to speak to each other more. You speak to 200 people every day in your business, and you have the feedback. You also spoke about the fact that the value flow has to improve. I think that's really important, but can you just expand on that?
Good afternoon, friends. It's a pleasure to be here amongst all of you. Different crowd here. A lot of bureaucrats, a lot of people who matter in the decision making. One of the things I find because I'm a stock market guy, I'm not economist, and we can't give very intelligent arguments, but we are in touch with the reality, and reality is far away from all these concepts of middle income trap and whole lot of things. the problems on the ground is very real. And if somebody from Delhi goes and listens to 100, 200 guys, actually in Faridabad and all here itself, because the problems of the businesses are no different in Delhi than in Mumbai and Bangalore or anywhere you go. It's the same problems. If you note down, there won't be more than 8 or 10 problems. But nobody is willing to look at that and get into bigger concepts and address those things. So like the problem in the economy of the growth actually started surfacing post ILFS crisis last year in July, August. And basically the economy runs on credit flow. And the plumbing of the credit flow is destroyed in last 12 months. And it is getting destroyed by the day, you know. And center of the problem, I mean, to little my understanding, what I see there is, if you see the company after company, from hero to zero, you know, that kind of, I mean, I have not seen in my 40 years career in the stock market, where wealth destruction of large corporates of 80,000, 100,000 crores becoming zero in 6 months, 8 months time. It is a shocking period we are living. And one of the culprit is the credit flow, plumbing is the credit flow. And it is not to do with the government. I'm not blaming the government, but government's problem is everybody's problem. And government is the one who can solve a lot of problems, because when a DHFL defaults for a day, he is bankrupt. When government defaults for 60 days and 100 days, there is nothing happens. Today, the biggest defaulter in the economy is government. And I think, yeah. Rajiv ji, just listen to the, you know, what they're saying. So I think one thing government can do without doing anything is take some overdraft from RBI. They can print as much as they want, and at least start paying 30 days bill on 30 days. That is the least they can do. I am telling you, at least 1/3 of the economic problem today will be sorted, if not more. So like that, if we start moving one by one. And see, one of the things is that we want to grow at Chinese pace, but we don't have a we cannot work like Chinese. We have a Western growth model or no model. How do we grow at Chinese rate? We have to have Indian growth model to grow at Indian pace. And what is that Indian growth model? Nobody knows. There is a discussion. I mean, see, if I want to become chartered accountant, I have to have my own strategy to become chartered accountant. I'm not a brilliant guy. I cannot go and go to an exam and pass it. So I have to have my own strategy. I have to change my handwriting. I have to do a lot of things. So like that, India has to struggle his way to get to that see, one of the best things Prime Minister has done is he has set a goal. Now we have to find a clear Indian strategy to reach there. I mean,
I wanted to agree with you, but I just want to point out that, are you saying that this is the only government that has started defaulting or not paying your bills on time? यूपीए एकदम टाइम पे देता था, एनडीए 1 टाइम पे देता था, या ज्यादा टाइम पे नहीं आ रहा अभी? बहुत लंबा हो गया डिले पहले के मुकाबले। पूछ रहा हूं आपसे, बताइए, आप अधिकारी बैठे हैं, बताइए, फिर बताइए कि इस सरकार की खास ये प्रॉब्लम है, बताइए, अगर है तो। नहीं है ना?
No. Let me now tell you, okay? Because you're not pointing anybody. I'm meeting a lot of guys. They are saying they're supplying to defense, and for last 6 to 8, listen.
My question is, 2011 में ये होता था, ये और
अभी बहुत बड़ा problem है.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a much bigger problem now. And right now, there is a liquidity crisis. So when there is one crisis, somebody can pay, he must pay.
No.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the problem was never there. B2G, business with government, was always a problem. It was not valuable in the stock market. But today, it has become worst. I'm looking at private equity deal. Let me tell you, the only problem with that company is that his 100% of the business or 80% of business is dependent on state and central government. And one of the state government has not paid for last 6 months.
Sure. So let me just come back to this, Dr. Rajiv, if I can come back to you. You know, you've said we have, and everybody agrees, there's strong fundamental of the Indian economy. You've also spoke about the fact we should be back to 8% plus growth by FY 2021. The question is, given the slowdown and the kind of questions that have been raised, real estate is another sector that people are talking about. What do we need to do now? Because that, in many senses, would define how we move forward.
No, for me, it's very clear that this problem started with the financial sector. And the current problem, when you get a problem which starts in the financial sector, it has a very nasty habit of getting out of hand very quickly. It sort of keeps exploding going on. But this problem in the financial sector hasn't started, Raamdeo said about ILFS and so on. Yes, that was what precipitated it. But the problem, in my view, started really between 2004 to 2011, when there was a punch bowl was out there in the market, and the credit growth was 27%, to non-food, to non-agricultural sector, and the banks was rushing in money to everybody concerned, so that when this government came into office 2014, they inherited a non-performing assets of about 8.5 lakh crore and rising at that point in time. And still many projects which they have been lent in the infrastructure, power, etc., becoming unviable over time and so on. Now, why am I going back to that level is because when you have a banking system which grows at, which is now in a sharp decline, which is what happened between after 2014 to 2000, in fact, started in 2012 really, when it started declining and the credit growth started declining, then somebody had to take its place, and which were the NBFCs. And in between 2014 to 2018, NBFCs grew at about 25% per annum. And their balance sheets expanded. They were small to begin with, but so therefore not the big impact, but they just expanded, hugely. Now, in a situation like that, when something like ILFS happens, then you just, as Raamdeo said, the plumbing gets, sort of completely blocked. And this is exactly what happened, because the agents which were supplying or which were shoring up the demand, the consumption demand, suddenly sat, suddenly sort of bent kaput, as it were. And therefore, and the investment demand had already come, unstuck, because of all that had happened in the infrastructure sector. Since 14 to 18, there has been no PPP projects. It's all been done by EPCs, etc., because no private sector has the balance sheet or has the guts, has the resources to come and invest in the infrastructure sector. Now, therefore, if we and the government recognizes this, absolutely, that the problem is in the financial sector, liquidity is turning into insolvency, and therefore you got to stop that, and you got to have that. And this is what we have been discussing in many ways. Now, the issue is that this is, and I hope this is an unprecedented situation for a government of India from the last 70 years. We've not faced this sort of a liquidity, sort of situation where the entire financial sector is up in a churn, and nobody is trusting anybody else. It's not just the government and the private sector. Within the private sector, nobody wants to lend to anybody else. Everybody is sitting on, on cash, but they will not move, etc. So there are two issues here. One, that you may have to take steps which are out of the ordinary, and these steps, and the government, it takes a lot for a government, which is inherited and which has got all the systems and the inertia, etc., to try and think that and go there. I mean, ours is not a system where we are encouraged to take risks. It's just the opposite. It's, that we are encouraged to be as conservative as possible. That's the first point. The second point is that I think the government must do whatever it can to take away some of the apprehensions of the private sector, and because there is that element as well, which is that now here, and I'll just end by saying, because I don't want to detail much, the whole nature of the game has changed in the last 4 years. Nature of the game has changed, after demonetization, after GST, after IBC, etc., etc. The earlier period where you had a 10, 20, 30, 35% of cash sloshing around, which used to help people, that's become much less. That's one. And the other side is that the businesses, which earlier assumed that the downside risks were all to be borne by the financial sector, by the banking sector, now are faced with a situation that they have to be party to that. And it's not just the upside risk that they take. So all of this put together means that it's a fairly complex situation. So therefore, but there are some easy answers, of course, and I completely agree with Raamdeo. I mean, I have no hesitation in saying that there is no business of the government to hold back payments which are due to the people, because that then has a domino effect all over the place. So I mean, I've said this inside the government, and I'm saying it here, so that every department which owes, and this is, by the way, this is being at the moment, there's a huge effort at the moment to try and get this sorted out and try and get this out of the way. In fact, Niti Aayog also had, and I'll just one example and I'll end. We had a mandate to say that every contract, every case which is up in the courts, please pay 75% of the value if the case has been won. What's if the first decision is in the favor of the private sector, what we find is that we did settle some of those cases, that for the rest, the requirement was that you pay 75% of the due, but also the interest payments. Now and you want a bank guarantee for it. Now the banks will not give you a guarantee for the interest part of it, so it got stuck. So there are these very sort of specific things which are happening, but I assure you that the government is prepared and will do this, and you will see this happening. That at least they are not reneging on the dues that they are there to the payment, and this will be done as very soon as far as I can judge.
We really look forward to that. Before I open up the questions to the audience, Dr. Roy, if I can just come back to you. Clearly, financial services and liquidity is a short-term or is a concern area. But you've also spoken about, in the context of structural changes, investing in healthcare, education, and the fact that, especially if you look at countries like Poland, which are seen as example of having avoided it, looking at innovation and wages. Is that an area that we really need to invest and look at from a long-term perspective?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, yes. Everything that he said, and everything that he said is true. But when you say that you're fixing the problem now, I mean, I'm going to take the government, I'm going to disagree with Rajiv. Of course, he can't agree with me on this. I'm going to take the government ecosystem as given. Because if you're not paying bills 5 years ago and you're waking up to that fact now, then I'm going to obviously discount the assurance that you're going to start paying bills on time next year. Because I think the problem is worse than sitting in Delhi and, Sultanate pe baith ke niche jao. Orders don't transmit in India. And I'm not blaming the government for this. We have a weak structure in government. Nobody wants to reform it. Nobody wants to reform public administration. When you don't reform public administration, when you have discretion everywhere, you have these problems. I have not seen one word from any government in this country, except I think once Manmohan Singh mumbled something for a month, and then he gave up, about reforming this giant behemoth called the Government of India or the governments of India. When you have reforms happening, especially you see them in the states, then you do see efficiency working. So my point is this is not about inequality. I'm putting a very simple private, I'm from Bombay, okay, I'm not from Delhi, so I'm not a government type. I'm putting a very simple private sector proposition to you. Do you or do you not think that the 350 million people in this country who earn 1x to 3x the minimum wage, baki bhul jao, garib hai, should be able to buy without subsidy a decent meal, clothing produced in India, one house paying EMI in their lifetime, no subsidy, decent healthcare package, decent education. You are talking about an India model. Here's my India model for you. ये 5 चीजों पे आप shift करें. Let these become leading indicators of the Indian economy, along with the ancillaries that come with it. Then you will see more sales of cycles, slowly two-wheelers, slowly four-wheelers. You won't start with four-wheelers and then go down to cycles, right? Then you will have a different India, which will grow at a highly accelerated pace just because more people will be included in the business process of producing stuff and therefore being able to demand it. आजकल क्या हो रहा है? You have essentially a compensatory state. I'm so sorry you're poor, you can't afford something, ये subsidy ले लो, खाना खरीद लो. This is all nothing to do with BJP or Congress or anything like that. What was न्याय? न्याय was, I'm sorry you're poor, here's an apology like a hotel manager कि आपका AC काम नहीं कर रहा है, तो ये थोड़ा सा पैसे ले लीजिए. कम से कम the Kisan scheme at least solved an immediate problem of the farmer. But if we don't move there, where 500, 600 million Indians, or okay, give me half of that, 300 million, but not 100 million Indians are not forming the bedrock of our growth, you will not see exports grow. The history of exports in India is software chodo. Our big export pride I have is pharma. Why were we good at producing pharma? Why were we good at producing certain kinds of transport equipment? Because we could sell to the common man. And when India can sell to the common man, it can knock the rest of the world out of business. You want to beat China on exports? Forget Bangladesh. Produce at affordable prices for 350 million Indians, and you will get all these goals. But to do that, we will have to make structural shifts. So while this credit squeeze and all that is temporary and can be dealt with, I do not think that it represents just a hiccup. कि वो बहुत ज़्यादा investment हो गया था. बहुत ज़्यादा investment क्यों हुआ था? In way too few a place. And as you were saying, there was a lot of rent seeking associated with because the club was small. So inclusive growth, and I think the Prime Minister, I'll stop with that, has made two very important paradigm shifts, which we should pay attention to. One is we have stopped talking about maximizing agricultural output. We are talking about doubling farmers' income. Now that's a project I love. I'm not able to get money for this. People will give me money to work on G20. I need 1.5 crore rupees to figure out 30,000, 40,000 farmer balance sheets, profit and loss accounts, funds flow statement. Let me understand the farming business as a business here, instead of talking in the air. And let me find out, what is a viable farm, in which agroclimatic region, and then we invest in it. So this doubling farmers' income lets us do that. I think Niti had an excellent task force on doubling farmers' income. They're great recommendations, but to carry it forward, we'll have to change the mindset of the Ministry of Agriculture and of Bombay sitting here. You have to look at agriculture as a business which you can invest in. Other is affordable housing. I love that word affordable, not low cost. Affordable means मेरे कमाई से मैं एक घर EMI देके जैसे हम सब करते हैं खरीदूंगा. If we can do that with 15 to 20 million houses a year, using the biggest vacant asset government has. Government has two things. Government is the biggest landowner in India, and government is the biggest equity owner in India. Equity पे नहीं जाऊंगा. You want to unlock value, unlock the equity and land values in government, and you will get 9% growth. You will get a $5 trillion economy, but an economy that is broad-based and based on the aspirations and demands of at least 1/3 of the population and not 10% of the population. That is the India model.
Rathin, इसमें जो है ना वो आपको मेरे ख्याल में I hope it's clear to you ये बात बहुत कि prior to this government in 2014, I don't think anybody paid as much attention to the raising the purchasing power and applying the services and making it possible for that third that you're talking about. By doing all kinds of things that they've done. The effort to have inclusive growth has been the biggest effort for the last 5 years than ever before. For example, Ayushman Bharat. Now what does Ayushman Bharat do? It creates purchasing power for 500 million people, for 100 million families, at the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 levels, where we hope, therefore, there will be a supply response from the medical health providers. It has done the same thing with affordable housing. It has done the same thing, with the opening the bank accounts. It has done the same thing with your loans, the Mudra loans, etc., etc. So, hello, and I'll just end there. The criticism, if it has to be made on decades of lack of attention and only rhetoric before that. And this, what has been done in the past 5 years, I am saying simply, has now laid the foundation for a rapid, inclusive, and much more sustainable growth, and also cleaner growth than what has been done ever before. We have a hiccup at the moment, we'll get over it, and then we will see the economy going forward at a much rapid pace and on a sustained basis than what you've had in the past.
You have my best wishes, we'll work with you to do that, but this is still the future continuous tense.
Absolutely. In that agreement, let me open this up to the audience. We do have about 4 minutes. A couple of questions we can take. So if you have a question, do raise your hand and somebody would be there.
My name is Sunil, and I'm CEO with the affordable housing finance company named Manibhavanam Home Finance. My question is to Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Now we know that the economy is in dire straits, and I fully agree with Mr. Raamdeo Agrawal. I mean, you look at all the data, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, the core industry growth is 0.2 versus about 8% last year. The worst part is government has been turning a blind eye for last 1 year to all the analysts, all the economists, all the newspapers, and industry stalwarts like Mr. Raamdeo Agrawal, who have been sharing this from time to time. Even now, what government is doing is very, very superficial. They're just scratching the surface. They're not addressing the real problem. And which is, the strangulating of the 10,000 NBFCs and 100 HFCs. Only 5% of them are AA+, and today PSU banks are lending to only AA+. Now these NBFCs and HFCs, have almost 39% market share in distributing credit to, in the economy and to those who don't have access to, PSU banks. I'll just take 1 more second to elaborate my questions. Now, by funding to only AA+, the government is further, increasing concentration risk and, leveraging these banks much more. if you fund 10,000 NBFCs, you diversify your risk, and these NBFCs are in different segments of the country, different parts of the country, and the banks have lesser risk. Just one more point, if banks analyze the portfolio, NBFCs and HFCs is one segment where the NPAs are the lowest, and they have been driving the growth in the economy for the last 25 odd years. Why is it that government is just turning a blind eye even now? And the earlier session also, the chief economist, and they are not agreeing, So what is your response to this?
Yeah, I think the question is more on the, I think the partial guarantee scheme which was recently launched wherein AA plus is the basic requirement.
The point is well taken about the NBFCs and, and they being the sort of prime drivers of consumption demand, et cetera, et cetera. The fact is that you have to find modalities, you have to find tools for getting them the credit that you're talking about. Now, the government has tried in this budget to announce the 1 lakh crore, whereby the banks which pick up stakes in the NBFCs will be guaranteed up to 10% of the loss, the credit loss. We need to, as I said earlier, and let me end there, this is an unprecedented situation in our economy, and we have not, we've not grappled with this before. We are trying to grapple with this. We will come up with solutions. Some of that has already happened in the budget. The rest, as far as I can make out, the banks, by the way, have been, they have prevented, you must remember, they have prevented any NBFC from going belly up. Now, nearly something like 2.5 lakh crore of funds have been diverted to the NBFCs. Yes, they have resulted also in the banks picking up the assets from the NBFCs, so the balance sheet sides have reduced. But nonetheless, they have prevented any mortality since the ILFS times, when many were expected. So the government is cognizant of this. The government the government knows that there is an issue here, but you have to find out the effective modalities to be able to do what you're trying to suggest.
Sure. Just one last question before we end the session, and I would request if you can make it very, very brief.
My name is Arun Jagat Ramka. I would like to point out that we are all grappling with the issue of the economy, but the issue is a structural issue. The basic structure, the way we have done business in India for 60-70 years, chalta hai attitude, that is changing in last 5 years. But without a transition phase, we are stuck in a space where nobody knows what to do. Because the way business was being done, over-invoicing and all the wrong things that were being done, suddenly with online digitization and with proper direction from the top, from the government, you can do without those things with GST and all these things. But without the transition provision, while corruption at the top is not there today, corruption in the ground level has multiplied manifold, which even the finance minister has been addressing in last few weeks with a direction to the tax officials to be sensitive, not to terrorize. It's not just income tax. It is in every law. The commercial laws in the country has been criminalized to an extent that we are not doing business in India, but we are doing business in a penal code.
No, I think your point is extremely well taken, and which is what I implied by saying that the rules of the game have changed.
Correct.
And this is not being recognized, and only recognized quite slowly. I think what we need to do is to have a much closer, much more, much sort of better engagement between the government and the private sector at this point of time, so that the dialogue is there, because in the changed rules of the game, you have to again create a feeling of trust with each other. And that's somehow kind of broken down. So this dialogue, this engagement, I think is a necessity today. But at the same time, it must be said that this transition that you're talking about, this transition is taking place, but so far in India without a blueprint going forward. We in Niti Aayog are trying to do that, I can assure you. And I think the Prime Minister himself on the 15th of August and also later on has talked about the fact that we have to identify 100 things which will make the ease of living better for the common Indian. We have to identify, half a dozen or a dozen things which will, reduce the criminalization in the commercial activity, etc. And believe you me that we are grappling with it, we are doing it. It just takes time. But as Raamdeo Sahab said, which is very true, time is very precious at the moment. Because when things start in the financial sector, they tend to explode and implode much faster than whenever otherwise. But nonetheless, we are trying, and I'm sure, I'm convinced that we will succeed.
Just one small suggestion. No, I fully agree with Mr. Rajiv Kumar what he said. We have full faith in the current government as well as Niti Aayog, what we are doing on the blueprint. Just for a transition phase, what we need to do, you put a 3, 4 or maximum 5-year limitation on the powers of investigative agencies and the tax officials to question people. Don't question people before the date of demonetization or maybe before May 14. And you will find most businesses, at least 70-80% of them, above the line where they are fully honest.
Sure. Thank you so much.
And that will reduce corruption at the ground level and take the country forward in the first march.
Thank you so much. We are, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to use this
Yeah.
forum to convey one more message that we have a tradition of saying Atithi Devo Bhava, but when it comes to investors, it is a Rakshaso Bhava. Look at the way investors are being treated. And we want all the investments in the world. Half the worlds are going below zero in terms of bond and everything. There's a $22-23 trillion of savings. We need very little. Let's seize this opportunity. I don't have suggestions, but I'm telling you this is amazing. If you treat somebody well, he will come.
Sure.
We are stuck here, but foreigners will also come.
Sure.
And they will come in droves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please create unlevel playing field. We have to be the most attractive market to come here. I believe even the visa you give to US guys, it is not a multi-entry visa. He cannot come back in 7 days from going somewhere. He has to come only after 30 days. So I think we need to create unlevel playing field for the foreign investors. They have tons of money. We need not even 0.00001% of that money.
Sure.
Please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to conclude by saying simple thing. I think there's a huge recognition. I've personally worked with a lot of government department. I think there's a clear recognition that we need to do. And I think what you've said is we expect more to happen. And with that optimistic note, we'll close the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Moving on to the polling. Ladies and gentlemen, here we have a question. Right here for this session. Let's have the question, please. India will struggle to reach 8 to 9% growth in the new decade. Those who agree, please press A. Those who disagree, press B. If you can't say anything, please press C. Once you've put in your option chosen, kindly keep the pad on the table. It just takes one push, that's about it. India will struggle to reach 8 to 9% growth in the new decade. A, agree, B, disagree, and C, can't say. 30 seconds is what you have as a time limit. And ladies and gentlemen, in a few moments, there we go. 37.5 agree, 50% disagree, 12.5% can't say anything. All right. With that being said, I would request Mr. Deepak Prem Naranji to kindly grace the stage and present a memento to our esteemed group of panelists. Can we have a round of applause for sir? We can do with a little bit of round of applause. Big thank you to all our panelists. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to break for lunch. It's a 45-minute lunch break. And right after that, we have a very interesting session. Please stay back after the lunch. 45 minutes is what we have for lunch break. Kindly enjoy the lunch. Thank you.